Ladies and gentlemen, two African teams are out now, and it's so sad, right? But I noticed a theme. I noticed that when they start the game, the teams are very confident, and as soon as they hit the goalpost, as soon as they score, they kind of like chill out and relax. And it kind of seems as though they just go back to defend that one goal, or in Senegal's case, that two goals. And there's a theme that I'm seeing, and it seems as though that, and correct me if I'm wrong, the teams are not confident that them playing at this higher level, that they actually belong there, especially when they're playing with like European teams. And I think that is not only a football thing. When I think about it at corporate America, and I'm assuming like in Europe, even though I haven't actually worked in there, is that I see it with, I'd say minorities in general. I'm not just gonna say in African teams. I don't think it's an African versus anything problem. I think it might actually be a minority thing, right? When a minority is given a position of authority or given a position where he has to play with, quote unquote, the big boys, right? And maybe he deserves it. Matter of fact, let's talk about the ones that actually deserve it. Like, you know that their work is really good. They put in the work. They're usually the most qualified or just as qualified. And then they get in there. There's some type of pattern that I've actually noticed. They seem to just play at a safe level. And that's what's going on with the footballers. All of a sudden, they're not taking as many risks as they should. And it comes from like not having that much confidence, right? Or not feeling as though they belong there. And so they kind of like don't want to mess things up. But what I noticed particularly is when their superiors, like somebody higher than them, who's overseeing them, gives them instructions, right? Many times, and this is not all the time, they tend to just relay the instructions to their direct reports. And they don't really allow space for nuance or trying to be creative, because in many of those places, being creative can cost you, understandably so, but also being creative is high risk. And usually I see people who are used to being in those circles, or at least have people who look like them in those circles. They're more willing to take risks because they have that space to play around with error. I think it's a normal thing. I don't think it's abnormal. You've been given this position. I'm thinking that usually is you feel like if you make mistake, people are going to fall back to the easiest excuse and say, okay, it's because you're this. Oh, there's people who are like this. You know what I'm talking about. Or you see your life as a story, and the story usually is grass to grace. You know where you've come from, and then you don't want to mess up that story by being too creative. And I think that that's what's going on with football as well. Like the players, many of the African teams have not actually made it to the next round before. This is their first time. But if you see, these teams are really very good. When they come in and they start playing, they're passing the ball like even way better. Some of them are playing, they have more creative players. They've been scoring. You see the Senegalese goal, one of the goals of the tournament. Like they really are playing at a higher level. And African Nations Cup has become even more competitive, very physical, very skillful. But I think now it's no longer a skill problem. There's still many things that African football needs to work on, though, in terms of their native football. But I don't think it's one type of very huge gap any longer. And I think that the bulk of it is a mentality problem. So I'm not saying this to criticize anybody in both analogies that I've made. I just think that it's time to move to the next level. But the next level may not be a skill issue. Even while skill is something that you need to work on and get, you can't do without skill. Competence is number one. But the next thing is mentality. You have to see yourself as you belong there. You got to see yourself as even better. And I gotta say, people think that that's arrogant, right? But it's only bad when it stops you or reduces your likelihood to go do the work, which is where you should not actually soften on. You should be reading. You should be the smartest person in the room, the wisest person in the room, the hardest worker in the room, everything. But I think that if you're coming from this position, you have to start to see yourself as better. I don't know how else to say it. You just have to see yourself as better. You have to be better so you can make it easier to see yourself as better. But you got to see yourself as better. That feeling, that perception would make you handle the ball more confidently. And people can actually see it. So in the case of work, even your direct reports can feel it. They can smell it. They can see the confidence. They can see that you're not shaking and you're not doing all those things. I think this whole situation with the football and FIFA is just of reference for a larger picture and a larger thing that's going on. I think I'm talking to somebody today. I'll see you in another video.